Hey everyone, I'm Joshua Orro, the Mustang Prince, and welcome to Mustang Prince Orro Reports. Now, today's episode is going to be another movie that I was planning to do later this year, but since we're in the middle of a dark age because of the epidemic, I thought to myself, why not? Anyway, speaking of dark periods, this coronavirus isn't the only dark period in history that I know. For example, there was a dark age without law and order during the early Middle Ages. And there were a few other epidemics that were around, like the plague, the swine flu, and a few others. Heck, even Disney was going through a dark age after Walt Disney's death, which lasted until the Disney Renaissance happened. Anyway, I decided to look at an old middle-aged movie that was made while Walt Disney was still alive and see how it holds up these days. Released on December 25th, Christmas Day, 1963, the movie is The Sword in the Stone. Now, this Disney adaptation of the classic fable chronicles King Arthur's humble beginnings. As an orphan child, Arthur, who was then known as Wart, wants to help his foster brother Kay succeed in becoming a knight. While helping Kay train, Wart stumbles upon a cabin in the woods belonging to Merlin, a bumbling but talented wizard. Merlin does his best to convince Wart that he is bound for greatness, and when Wart and Kay, along with Sir Ector, travel to London to attend a jousting contest, they learn that Merlin may be right. So, what do I personally think of this movie? Well, while most people say that this is the weakest animated film that Walt Disney made, in my personal opinion, it's still a childhood favorite of mine. But to further explain why I love the movie, let's move on to Mustang notes. Walt Disney first acquired the film rights to the T.H. White novel in 1939, and various attempts at developing the film would last 2 decades before actual production began. The Sword in the Stone, along with The Jungle Book, would be the last animated film from Walt Disney Productions to be produced by Walt Disney before his death on December 15, 1966. Work on The Sword in the Stone was solely done by veteran story artist Bill Peet. After Disney seen the 1960s Broadway production of Camelot, he approved the project to enter production. Writing in his autobiography, Peet decided to write a screenplay before producing storyboards, though he found the narrative complicated with the Arthur legend woven into a mixture of other legends and myths, and finding a direct storyline required sifting and sorting. After Walt received the first screenplay draft, he told Peet that it should have more substance. On his second draft, Peet lengthened it by enlarging on the more dramatic aspects of the story, in which Walt approved of through a call from Palm Springs, Florida. A new animation technique, known as touch-up, was created during production. The animation process had previously involved the use of cleanups, where assistant animators transferred the directing animator's sketches by hand onto a new sheet of paper, which would later be copied to an animation cell. Cleanups were replaced by touch-ups, where the assistants would draw directly on the animator's sketches before the drawing was Xeroxed into a cell. And what are my thoughts on this style of animation? Well, like the other classic Disney films that Walt worked on, the animation is absolutely timeless. despite the fact that there are a few bits that were recycled from other Disney films like Bambi, Sleeping Beauty, and 101 Dalmatians. Anyway, I like the look of middle-aged England, and I think it's very interesting that this movie mostly takes place during July. But after Merlin's duel with Madame Mim, it skips 5 months later to the Christmas/New Year's holidays. Speaking of Christmas, I was first introduced to this movie by one of the old classic Disney Christmas specials, I think which was during my early childhood, but I can't remember which one, though. Also to note, this was the very first time the Sherman Brothers would write songs for a major animated Disney film. And this was before they wrote songs for other films like Mary Poppins, The Jungle Book, Winnie the Pooh, The Aristocats, and others. The first song in the film is called The Sword and the Stone, sung during the opening prologue by Fred Darien. To me, this title song is very emotional, with the death of King Uther Pendragon, and it is very beautiful when the titular sword, Excalibur, magically appears in an anvil on a stone in the center of London. Also, I think Fred Darien's singing is kind of reminiscent to a medieval minstrel. Plus, I think Sebastian Cabot's narration, which follows the song, is very powerful and wise. However, while this song is kind of short, I did find an extended version on YouTube, which includes a new verse. Our next song is Hicatus Ficatus, sung by Merlin as he packs his things so that he can be ready to leave his house and join Wart back to his castle. Now, this is one of my favorite songs in the entire movie. While it mostly consists of incantations, I think it's very clever how Merlin can fit all of his stuff into one suitcase by shrinking them. But after Merlin scolds the sugar bowl for getting rough with a teapot, the song goes really fast, and the funniest part is when Archimedes' birdcage shrinks with him inside it. Also, the song gets a really short reprise where Merlin enchants the kitchen by having the dishes wash themselves and the floors to be mopped and swept, until later when it got interfered by Sir Ector and Kay. By the way, that whole kitchen fiasco scene made me think of a similar scene from Fantasia, in a way, especially with how Merlin puts his magic to a halt, kind of like what Yen Sid did. Next is That's What Makes the World Go Round, sung by Merlin as he teaches Wart about physics, instincts, and intellect while they swim in the moat as fish. I find this to be my second favorite song in the movie, and as a kid, I loved to sing along with it. However, during the song, Merlin and Wart are being followed by a frog who pesters Wart by biting his tail, but later it gets worse when Wart becomes the target of a monstrous pike. Next is The Most Befuddling Thing. In this scene, Merlin and Wart are transformed into squirrels to learn about gravity, but the lesson is interrupted by a little red-headed girl squirrel who immediately becomes smitten with Wart. In my opinion, this song is kind of the weakest. The reason why Merlin sings it is so that he can explain to Wart that love cannot be explained specifically. But the main problem is, Wart is not in love with this squirrel, and he's trying to get away from her. And, well, the worst thing is, Merlin makes love sound like some sort of mental illness that gets worse the more you try to avoid the person who has it. And Merlin doesn't seem to do anything to help Wart out of this situation. But during the song, Merlin gets stalked by an old fat squirrel, and a hungry wolf tries to eat Wart. Thankfully, the girl squirrel saves Wart by biting the wolf in the leg, and she has him chase her off a cliff and has him getting stuck in a log. However, it is very sad when the girl squirrel had to realize the truth that Wart was indeed human. Finally, we have the sort of villain song, Mad Madam Mim, where Mim tries to show Wart that she can be more impressive than Merlin. To me, I think this song is not really a great one, but it does make up for the last one. But on the other hand, it is very impressive that Mim can do all sorts of things, like growing, shrinking, turning herself hideous or beautiful, and a few other things. Anyway, now that we're done with Mustang notes, animation, and songs, let's go over the characters and the voice actors who brought them to life. Let's begin with Arthur, aka Wart, who happens to be voiced by Ricky Sorensen, along with Richard and Robert Reiterman. Wart is a 12-year-old page who's training to be a squire. Now, despite his ever-changing voice, I think Wart has a rich imagination, like when he dreams about being a knight and having adventures. Plus, there are times when Wart can be very awkward and clumsy, but he's still very innocent, and he has a good heart. Plus, I think Wart has the potential to be a great king for England. Next we come to the world's most powerful wizard, Merlin, voiced by Carl Swenson. Now, I gotta say, despite a few hiccups like his temper tantrums and getting his beard caught on certain things, Merlin is my favorite character in the entire movie. And I think he's a great magic teacher, like in Sophia the First, and an awesome Keyblade tutor, like in Kingdom Hearts. And I know he's currently living in Radiant Garden, but I just hope that someday his world will have an appearance in a future game. Anyway, I like Merlin for his wisdom, and he believes in the philosophy of brain over brawn. Plus, Merlin values education as opposed to the war training philosophies. Also, not only can Merlin shapeshift, but he can also see into the future and travel through time. That's what he did when he went to 20th century Bermuda. Plus, I like the certain old models that he keeps, like an old steam locomotive and an airplane model. Next we have Archimedes, the highly educated owl, voiced by Junius Matthews, who'd later voice Rabbit in 3 of the Winnie the Pooh shorts. I like him too. Yeah, he can be somewhat grouchy and sarcastic, especially in the morning, but he's very loyal to Merlin, and he's not afraid to point out the wizard's shortcomings. Also, Archimedes is very smart, and he possesses a great deal of practical knowledge. Also, I like the scene where he saves Wart from a pike, and when he teaches Wart to fly, which gets cut short when Wart gets chased by a hawk. Ugh, scares me to this very day. And I also like that Archimedes stays with Ward after Merlin blasts off to Bermuda. Next is Ward's foster father, Sir Ector, voiced by the movie's narrator, Sebastian Cabot, who not only narrated the original Winnie the Pooh shorts, but he also voiced Bagheera in the Jungle Book. To me, Ector treats Ward very harshly by favoring his son Kay and treating Ward as a servant. Plus, Ector is extremely distrustful of Merlin's magic, believing it to be evil, and he constantly mispronounces his name as Marvin. But after Ward is revealed to be the true King of England, he regrets his mistreatment of the boy, and he begs for Arthur's forgiveness. Next is Ward's foster brother, Sir Kay, voiced by Norman Alden. Kay is training to become a knight like his father. I find Kay to be a bit self-centered, boorish, and lazy, despite being higher in rank than Ward. Plus, Kay treats Arthur rather cruelly, often trying to physically attack him for his mistakes. Kinda sounds like my dad sometimes. However, at the end of the movie, when Arthur becomes king, Kay shows guilt for the way he treated him in the past. Another character to talk about is Sir Pellinore, voiced by Alan Napier, who got to be in the 1960s Batman series. Pellinore is an old friend of Sir Ector, and he was one of the late King Uther's knights. When we first see him in the movie, Pellinore informs Ector and Kay that a jousting tournament will be held in London on New Year's Day, and the winner will become King of England. In my eyes, while Pellinore doesn't have too many scenes, I think he's a likable knight due to his friendly and quiet personality. And I also like the part where he stands up for Ward at the tournament. Also, I find it funny when Pellinore sniffles every time his mustache gets wet. Finally, we have Merlin's rival, Madame Mim, voiced by Martha Wentworth, who voiced Nanny, Lucy, and Queenie in 101 Dalmatians. And she also voices the old fat squirrel who flirted with Merlin earlier in the movie. Anyway, Madame Mim is a witch whose magic is used for trickery as opposed to Merlin's scientific skills. To me, while Mim's role in the movie doesn't really add much, she is very manipulative, psychotic, and mischievous. And she's also crazy about games. But at the same time, she's kind of silly compared to Merlin's other rival, Morgana. Plus, I think her duel with Merlin is mostly pretty funny compared to those wizarding duels that you'd see in Harry Potter, due to them both turning into different animals. Plus, I think Madame Mim's dragon form is not as ferocious as Maleficent's or Queen Nerissa's. But I think it was very genius when Merlin outsmarted Mim by turning into a germ and infecting her. And now let's move on to my final words. Overall, The Sword in the Stone, despite a few hiccups and flaws, is still one of my childhood favorite Disney films. I like the film's premise, and the main characters like Ward, Merlin, and Archimedes are still enjoyable. The voice cast is pretty good, and the animation is absolutely timeless. Plus, the Sherman brothers did a pretty good job for their first time songwriting for an animated Disney film. Also, while this movie never got a sequel, I heard that a live-action remake has been in development ever since 2015, and it is expected to be streaming on Disney Plus soon. Still, I recommend you folks to watch this movie if you want a whiz-bang good time filled with whimsical Disney magic. As for my rating, I'll give it a 63% out of 100. Well, that's all for now. But if you think that Merlin is the only Disney character who can travel through time, be sure to stay tuned and find out what the sitch is for my next blog. Mustang Power.